So I decided to skip around a little bit in this chapter 8 and not do section 8.3, which I had mentioned before, but I decided to go to section 8.9 and concentrate on the quadratic formula. This is a very important formula to know and to use. Most 8th grade teachers don't get the opportunity to go through this, and it is very, very important. You will use this a lot in Algebra 2. It is used a tremendous amount on the SATs, so I thought I'd go over it so you're a little comfortable if you did come upon this in other avenues to be able to do it. So the quadratic formula, this is used to find the solutions of a quadratic function. So in our last section, we called them zeros. That is where the parabola touches the x-axis. So there are several ways to go about doing this. You could do factoring. That's why we spent a whole chapter on factoring. There is using square roots. There's something called completing the square. There are 5 total ways to do this. The quadratic function is one of the most important because it always works on every single type of problem. You don't have to, sometimes the factoring ones can't be factored and all that. So I took the one that was the most important, and that's what we're going to go over. This is our last section of from the textbook that we're going to go over this year. So let's do this. So below here, I have it all written out for you. So verbally, how you would say this is that x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now, step 1, you're going to take whatever the equation is given to you. Make sure it equals 0 if it isn't already equaling 0. Then you're going to locate your a, b, and c value, and you plug it into the formula. Then you are going to solve it and do the math. So let's go through this. In this first example, 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. So I just pre-wrote out the quadratic formula, being that some of you may have just learned it and may not have memorized it in 10 seconds. So I'm going to fill in my values. First, I want to identify what my a, b, and c are. In this problem, a is 2, b is 3, c is negative 5. So the reason for the opposite of b, you don't just necessarily negative b, because if b is negative, it's going to become positive. So I have x equals opposite of b, which in this case just makes it negative. Again, I'm going to be obnoxious here and very dramatic and write everything in. As far as a calculator is concerned, of course you can use a calculator. You would want to, I would recommend breaking it up into multiple steps rather than trying to type everything in your calculator all at one time. It becomes difficult. The calculator doesn't totally understand the process of, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So I'd kind of break it up. And sometimes a lot of this math you can do yourself. For example, 3 squared. I hope you can do 3 squared. This 4 times 2 times negative 5, 4 times 2 is 8, times negative 5 is going to be negative 40. Notice I had the subtraction sign there, which was right here, and then I had the negative sign for multiplying 4 times 2 times negative 5. So on the bottom, 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. So far I didn't really need a calculator. Now I have x equals negative 3. Plus or minus the square root, this becomes 9 plus 40 over negative 10. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 49 over negative 10. Now that becomes, the square root of 49 is a perfect square. And I have this as my, I'm almost done. In this last part, I'm going to have to draw it over to the side here because I ran out of room. You're going to do one positive and one with a subtraction sign. So that's where the plus minus sign comes from. You do 1 plus and 1 minus. So I'm going to do this math. Negative 3 plus 7 is 4 over negative 10. That reduces to negative 2/5. This gives me negative 10 over negative 10, which is positive 1. So my answer is negative 2/5 and 1. If you want to make negative 2/5 0.4, you can do that as well. Again, being that it's going to be multiple choice, just know that they mean the same thing. Okay, let's try another one. All right, so in this next one, A is negative 3, B is 5, C is 2. Again, I'll write this out. All right, so now I'm going to plug it in. The opposite of B, plus or minus. If at any point you can do anything in your head, go ahead. For example, 5 squared. Maybe you already know that that is going to be 25. Again, I'm being dramatic by writing everything out. So this is just a matter of plugging things into an equation. That's all that we're doing. So plus or minus, this is 25 minus 4 times negative 3 is negative 12, times 2 is negative 24. So negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 24. Next is negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 over negative 6, which is negative 5 plus or minus 7 over negative 6. So now I have negative 5 plus 7 divided by negative 6 and negative 5 minus 7 divided by negative 6. First one, negative 5 plus 7 is positive 2, which reduces to negative 1/3. Next one is negative 12 over negative 6, which gives me positive 2. Now my answers, I do not put parentheses around them because these are just two x values. What this means is if I had a graph, this parabola is downward facing, so it would mean something like this, basically. One point is at negative 1/3. One solution is at 2. So that's what they're looking for, and that's why you do not write it like this. Okay, this signifies a coordinate point, which is not what I'm looking for here. Okay, on this third example, notice it doesn't equal 0. So I have to get everything over to one side, so I'm going to add 9x. Next, I'm going to write this in standard form so I can clearly see who is A, who is B, who is C. So I have A is negative 5, B is 9, C is 2. Again, I'll write it out for you. The more you write it out, the quicker you're going to have it memorized. If this had been in the normal classroom, I would have done a fun little oral quiz, or maybe I can still do that just for fun when we return back to Zoom. Super fun. Okay, 9 squared minus 4 times negative 5 times 2, all divided by 2 times negative 5. Okay, negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 81 minus, what do I have here? 4 times 5 is negative 20 times 2 is 40, all divided by negative 10. Negative 9 plus or minus, this is 81 plus 40. Now, the ones that we're going to do are going to come out where underneath the square root is going to be a perfect square. Plus or minus the square root of 121 over negative 10. That's negative 9 plus or minus 11 over negative 10. So what I'm talking about is this number right here. That actually has a name. It's called the discriminant. So the ones, we don't have enough time to go into the ones that come out to be nasty decimals and stuff. So if you're getting something that's really a bad number, that's because that's not a perfect square under there, then you did something wrong, because I'm going to protect us. We don't have enough time to be doing that. It's like playing with fire. All right, so I have negative 9 plus 11 divided by negative 10 and negative 9 minus 11. So this gives me 2 over negative 10, which is negative 1/5. This one gives me negative 20 over negative 10, which is 2. So my answer is negative 1/2 and positive 2. Now, if you had a lot of time on your hands, you could take those numbers and plug them back into the original equation. If it comes out that it works out on both sides of the equation, then you know you're right. All right, I believe this, oh, no, it's not. We've got 2 more to do. All right, so in this one, I've got A is 3, B is negative 2, C is 2. again, I'll write it out. The opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals the opposite of b. So this is the first time I have a negative b value so far in this lesson. So notice I did put it in the parentheses because when you are going to take the opposite, it's going to become positive. Also, when I go to square it, it's going to become positive as well. All right, so this becomes x equals the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. When I square it, negative 2 squared gives me a 4. Then I have 4 times 3 times 2, which is 24, all over 6. 2 plus or minus, this is negative 20 over 6. So this is a big problem. The fact that it's negative 20. When you get a negative underneath that square root sign, we can't take the square root of something negative. So for this answer, there's no solution. What this means is this is a parabola that does not touch the x-axis. So it's something like this. This would be the if I had asked you in last week's lesson, what are the zeros? You'd say that there were none because it has no solution. Now when you're asked to solve it, you would say no solution. We don't write any symbol for it or anything like that. So if this was a fill in the blank question, you'd have to write out the words no solution. There's no other way to write that. Plus the quizzes doesn't allow, the keyboard doesn't have the symbol, the zero with the slash through it. All right. Last one. Here I have everything equal to 0, so I can go ahead and I can just find my values of a, b, and c. Then again, I will write my formula. Okay, so I have negative 8 plus or minus. This gives me 8, let me put that in parentheses, squared minus 4 times 1 times 16, all divided by 2 times 1. All right, so this gives me negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 64 all over 2. So notice what happens in this one. I end up with a 0 underneath the square root sign. So when you end up with a 0, the square root of 0 is 0. So in this circumstance, I'm only going to have one answer. So when you end up with 0 underneath the square root sign, you are only going to have one answer. Now, what I want you to practice is page 587, numbers 2 through 7 all before returning to Zoom. And just in case the mood strikes me, you may be asked to state what the quadratic formula is. I'll make you come on camera so I can see that you're not just, obviously if I can't see you, you could just be reading it. So maybe we could, as fun, since last Friday's lesson, no people weren't answering, now we can have lots of fun and I can quiz you on it and make sure you know it. So be ready, do your hair, and I'll see you in Zoom in a little bit.